going to try it up here. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, technically GIF or GIFs. I go with GIFs, but so before I get into my research on it, I feel it's very valuable to deconstruct what a GIF is. So those are the definitions, but in basic, a GIF is an image file that the way it was constructed, you could have more image files laid on top of it, and that can create an animated image. And a lot of people nowadays know of reaction GIFs where someone uses a GIF as a sort of language approach where you're able to respond to somebody and use it in place of words. So another way of looking at it is just how long it's been around. So if you've been around since the 90s, you remember hamster dance. So back then in the 90s, it was heavily used just for an aesthetic, a really cool looking thing. It didn't have much meaning behind it beyond that. So in more modern times, you have reaction GIFs. I'm sure that's how everybody uses the library right now, right? You just go and stuff everything in a bag. But yeah, in this case, you could say something with an image. And you don't have to use a video. So the qualities of a GIF, you don't have to have any sound or buttons to click. It can loop or it could just not loop. Depends on what you want to do with it, but most people see looping. But what really makes it compelling is the fact that there's no special plugins or browser extensions required. It's pretty much everywhere. And the reason behind that is because it's been around since the 80s. So since it's been around since the 80s, it's kind of built into just about everything that's out there, as opposed to these video solutions where if you don't have the plugin, it's not going to work for you. And before I get into my research, I like to use this GIF right here because it gives you an idea of another approach to GIFs besides just it's neat or I'm going to respond to somebody. So getting into the research, as I've looked at the library science literature, I could only really find about 6 articles that really dealt with this topic. And of those 6 articles, they went into the history of GIFs, social engagement, the tools that you can use to create it, what they think of as best practices, use in library guides, and I list 3 there, but one of them is actually from back in 2000. And accessibility, and it's kind of a shame to me that only one of them really addresses accessibility because that's so important nowadays. So within that research, I noticed there are huge gaps, and before I can actually do a good research job somewhere, I want to make sure I'm covering something that hasn't been covered before. So quantitative studies on patron and student interest are the really big thing that need to be covered because there's a lot of, I'm doing this, it's kind of neat, people say they like it, but it's different from actually being able to say, yeah, it had this impact. There's also articles to assess animated GIF efficacy found in other disciplines, and in those cases, it tends to be more like, do I like this? Is it helping me out? As opposed to, is it really working for me? There are no studies comparing animated GIFs to other modes. So if you're going to use it, you want to make sure that it's the best thing that you're using for that topic. And then the big one for me is I found nothing that's covering screen size and internet speed, which is extremely important with how many students are using cell phones nowadays. So my general guidance mixed in with general guidance I found from other stuff is use responsive design to change the size depending on if it's on a phone or on a computer. And there is JavaScript code out there that can switch those. So there's also repeating essential information as text. In my view, you want to make sure that if you don't have the image, if it's not working for some reason, or if it's just loading slowly, that you have the text there for them to actually consult. The 10 seconds or less is the suggested time for it. Limit number of GIFs to 1 on screen at a time, because if you have like 5 different GIFs, all of a sudden you're like, where do I look at first? And then limit content focus to the essentials, because if you have a lot of empty space and a tiny part of it is what's moving, then you just are kind of wasting your space. So up there I'm kind of showing that something that's really big on one screen, this is my like mock-up of it, is not going to work so well if you're looking at a tiny phone. So accessibility is my final area. So accessibility really matters when you're constructing something that uses a GIF. First and foremost, alt text, because if your image doesn't even load at all, which is helpful for everybody to have something ready, or if a screen reader can't catch it, then alt text will make sure that you're giving the information that's needed. There's also blinking and flashing, and these are getting into the things that you might not normally think of immediately. So if you have too much blinking and flashing in a short time frame, you're putting people at risk of epilepsy. And then there's also loops, which can be very distracting if you have ADHD or other attention disorders. And another thing I just like to say is I really like captions when I'm watching videos. So when you're doing these, a lot of times people will think, oh, I need to do this just for people that have this issue. But really, you could be helping a lot of people that don't even have the issue just by accounting for these things. So within the blinking, this is a complex way of pretty much just saying limit how many you're doing at one time. You don't want to have a bunch of them in a short time frame. And also limit the space, like how close the flashes are. So that's the specific guidelines, but general rules, that's what you need. General accessibility guidance, I would say consider the multiple means of representation that you're already covering when you're working on your classes. So universal design for learning guidelines. Like I said before, alternative text for the essential information. You might also want to consider alternate versions of the thing that do not include a GIF, like a PDF, for example. So that way you're not relying on just one thing, there are other options. There is clickable JavaScript code to switch between a still image and a GIF as well. And the reason I bring that up is the attention disorder aspect of it. So I've done that quite a bit in the past. And then there's PEAT for photosensitivity analysis. So PEAT is photosensitive epilepsy analysis tool. And with that, it can detect if a video fails accessibility needs. So with this, you have to convert your GIF into a video, but then it will warn you, and that's the example that they give on their website, where the red is like, you gotta be very careful. And after the capture, you have to run the analysis on the program. So this is my example of how it could be used in an instruction setting, especially for libraries. So I'm including the GIF itself with an arrow that tells you here's where it is on campus, but then I also include text on the side so that I could say, okay, just in case you don't know, South End of campus, it's across the library plaza, opposite side of the large parking lot, and that's what a lot of what I do in the library is I try and relate things to other things, landmarks. Like if you're starting here, go from here to this place. It makes it a little easier than just saying, oh, it's north of this street to me. And then I also include where you can see the map yourself in case you need to see the whole thing. So that wraps up mine.